This video will discuss the different ways individuals with disabilities centered around behaviors, um, how their needs are met in the education system. Um, First, we're going to start off with this great video, which I believe really does encapsulate pretty much everything that the school system is responsible for when it comes to addressing the needs of those with emotional and behavioral challenges. Of How do I say this? And an acronym that you may not hear as much anymore, but you still may hear is EBD, and that stands for emotionally and behaviorally disturbed students. Uh, in my opinion, from a parent's perspective, we don't hear it as much. I do know when I taught in Florida back in the early 2000s, they had EBD classrooms, and students were segregated in special education based off of their disability. Once we got to California in 2008, we noticed that they did not do that, which I preferred because nobody likes to hear, as a student, like I'm in the EBD class or I'm in the, whatever class, the medically fragile class, which was a uh, phrase I heard in Florida quite often. Um, we got here and they called it, we got your mild to moderate, moderate to severe, and you got your severe class, which depending on who you talk to, they may not like that either. Can't please everyone, but just wanted to put that out there that you may hear or see the acronym EBD, and it stands for emotional and behaviorally disturbed students. And like I said, this great video gives a great overview of everything that the school system is responsible for doing for the child. Okay, when it comes to behavior, it is always measured based off of frequency, which also means rate, the intensity, duration, and age appropriateness. Now, if you have a child in the preschool setting and they're throwing tantrums, it isn't necessarily something that you would start to track because what 2 and 3 and possibly 4-year-old does not throw a tantrum from time to time if they're not getting the center that they want, or if it's the wrong snack today, or maybe they didn't sleep well the night before, so they came in cranky. It's just something that you have to take into consideration. Is the behavior something that a typical child would do? Like I said, throw a tantrum at 2 and 3 and possibly 4. Yeah, tantrums, or even meltdowns may be something that you see, around all those children. Once they get into the school system, you may see some temper tantrums, maybe kindergarten. I would say by first grade, you're not seeing it as much, or at least you shouldn't be, because by then the child knows that when they go to school, they're expected to sit. Of course, this is all based off of pre-COVID, but even now, I see things on Twitter and even, sometimes different little things on Instagram where people will post how their child, started off in the day sitting in front of the computer because they're learning online, and what they look like later on in the day. And the children they just look completely undone because they're children and they're used to being up and moving around just like all of us. And then B, this isn't our standard way of learning. So they're really having to, they're really being asked to do a lot. I'm just going to put it like that. The school systems are really putting a lot on children to have to learn online, especially when they're really, really young and they just naturally have a lot more energy than the rest of us. But when it comes to measuring the behavior, you want to look at the rate, how often it's happening, how frequently it's happening, what's the intensity of it, is there a tantrum, if tantrums is the thing, is there tantrum just basically, stomping their foot and maybe holding their breath, folding their arms, or is it something where they're starting to hurt themselves or others, or destroy property in the classroom or around the school, even running away. Individuals with disabilities similar to my son have one of their behaviors is the fight or flight. Either they're going to stand their ground and fight, whether it be verbally or physically, or they're going to run. And elopement is a true concern with certain disabilities because That's all they know how to do. Their brain tells them to leave the situation and they run. And when they run, they don't sometimes take into consideration safety. And so that brings on a whole different, host of challenges. And then you want to look at the duration. How long did the behavior last? And how long did the tantrum take place? My son would have tantrums that would last 30 and 40 minutes. And anybody else would think, that's a long time to be throwing a tantrum. Well, it is. And usually when he'd be done throwing a tantrum, he's so emotionally spent and sometimes physically spent that he wants to sleep the rest of the day. Well, that doesn't work out well when you're in school or transitioning between school and, say, soccer, which was something I thought would be a good idea, which he did not. So you have to take into consideration all of it. And like I said, the age appropriateness of the behavior as well. It's really typical for those of us who have worked in middle school or been around children who are entering middle school, or obviously all of us have gone through middle school. You tend to get more attitude from students in middle school. So when my son transitioned to Pacific Beach Middle School, he went from someone who didn't say any curse words to saying mild curse words because of who he was around. They really test their limits. Puberty has sprouted, and everyone is flexing their wings and attitudes and what they want, what they don't want, and it's just a really fun, with quotation marks, time. And then so we had to address that because obviously it's inappropriate for him to respond with curse words to anyone and to use them. And then when he entered high school, those minor or mild curse words they just went to the level of ridiculousness. So we had to really, bring that in. But once again, it's something that children in high school do. You walk through the halls and all you hear is just overuse of curse words. And it's like, that's the one environment, I guess, they feel like they can kind of be themselves. But they still have to be appropriate. And with kids with disabilities, they may not know. And I believe everyone really wants to feel connected to someone, not necessarily to everyone. And when you want to fit in, or someone like my kid who wants to fit in, if everyone else around him is cursing, then he's going to curse too. If everyone else around him is wearing flat bill caps, then he's going to want them too. So, some of those things just kind of go along with peer pressure. But when it comes to things that impact behaviors that impact the child's safety, other safety, school property being destroyed, and it impacts the learning environment. And it could be a combination of all, or it can just be one. Because like I said, depending on the intensity of it, as a teacher, you may have to clear out the entire room so that one student who would not remove himself to the quiet corner or to the quiet space, you have to take that into account as well. So if they're in the room destroying it because they're having a full-on meltdown, as the teacher, as the para, you have to be ready to move the rest of the students out to keep the others, not only to keep them safe, but to keep the other student who's having the meltdown safe as well. So with the IEP, if you have a student, child, family member, of someone who is having these types of behaviors that are impacting not only their education, but the education of others, like I said, the learning environment, their safety, others' personal safety, safety, then you can ask for an FBA, which is a functional behavioral assessment. This goes along with the IEP. And so basically, this video will go over exactly what an FBA is and how the assessment really does work. As the teacher, the person who's working on the IEP, as well as the school psychologist and everyone else a part of the team, you're going to be collecting data to develop develop strategies that are going to help them being the student, that is, replace those negative behaviors with more positive behaviors. And so you never want to just go in and wag the finger and like, no, Johnny, don't do that. Don't, no, don't, you want to give them replacement. So if, like I said, with the example earlier, if hitting someone is their way of getting the attention for whatever reason, sometimes it's not the parents, that obviously parents don't go around teaching their children, if you want their attention, just go up and hit them. But at some point, the student was able to hit someone to get attention. And so it's like, oh, if I want your attention, I hit you, you're listening to me, so let me repeat that. Well, that's an inappropriate way to get anyone's attention. So you want to put a replacement behavior in that. You want to put a replacement behavior there in place of the hitting, so that the child begins to understand this is the appropriate way to get someone's attention. The information, the data for the FBA feeds into the BIP, which is the Behavior Intervention Plan. This is usually somewhere near the end of the IEP. Not that placement matters, but I always have wanted the BIP to be closer to the front of the IEP when you're going through the IEP meeting, that is, because you want to take these things into consideration when it comes to the educational goals. But that's a placement thing, and honestly, as a parent, as a teacher, if you can get the whole team to agree upon it, I don't think there's really a reason not to move the discussion of the BIP earlier up in the IEP meeting. And so the BIP contains all the positive behavior support strategies to replace the inappropriate behavior. And so what was I going to say else about the BIP? The BIP is one thing. So once it's in place, it's really important. Like I said, everyone a part of the IEP team needs to monitor its success or not, because just because you put a strategy on paper, we all know it doesn't mean it works. If that was the case, the world would be perfect, right? So once the parents, well, hopefully the parents, the teachers, the paras, everyone else a part of the IEP team starts to see if these support strategies are helping, then you know, you can continue and then maybe see how it's impacting the behavior. If you want the student to stop hitting to get attention, and instead you want them to say, excuse me, if they have the communication skills. If they don't have the communication skills, maybe you want to give them a picture exchange communication system where they use a picture to put it on their desk to show that they need help. Or you can teach them to raise their hand. That's something that a lot of students do, which is very, very common and honestly natural. But whatever it is the child can do, you want to lean into that to help them replace the inappropriate behavior. And so let's check out this video really quick. So it's important to remember when you are talking about interventions that are going to change a student's behavior, you always want to address the inappropriate behavior, because you have to let the student know it is not an appropriate way to do it, but you want to approach it in a way where you're immediately replacing it with a possible option. So to go back to the student hitting, you know, if you want that student to say raise their hand, which is something, you know, if they have the physical ability, then they can do. You want to be able to say, you know, and communicate to them at their level with the resources and strategies that are in their IEP on, you know, we don't like it when Johnny hits, this makes other people sad. You know, our peers, our friends rather, because children don't know what peers are, our friends raise their hand. Our friends use the PEC system. Our friends use our timer. You know, our friends use our bell. My son has been in classes where he had one student who's completely nonverbal and confined to a wheelchair, but she had the use of one hand, and she used that hand to ring a bell. And it wasn't something that was, you know, like a ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. It was more just like a bing, you know, bing. And so that was her way of getting her parents' attention. It was her way of getting the teacher's attention if she needed something. And so it wasn't that she was off in a corner just waiting to ring the bell. It was like she could be in the middle of doing something or watching a video or whatever it is they did in class. And if for whatever reason she needed something, then she got to, she had a little bell to ring, and that's way more appropriate than just moving things off her desk, because that's basically what she was doing. She had a tray attached to her wheelchair, and prior to having the bell to ring, if she wanted anyone's attention, whatever was on the tray in front of her, she would just push it off. And so, of course, that gets anyone's attention, but it's also inappropriate in society to just, you know, start knocking things over, basically flipping tables when you want someone's attention. Unless you're looking for that negative reaction, which in her case she wasn't, therefore she has the bell. You want to develop appropriate cognition. So once again, you don't want to turn around and tell someone who's nonverbal like you need to speak up more, because obviously that's inappropriate. My son had a teacher who refused to implement his IEP, and in his IEP it said he had to have a visual schedule. Everything that he did had to be visual. It needed to be up on the board, and smaller version of it was on his desk. Well, she decided she didn't want to do visuals, and she said that she would just start putting the words up there on the board instead, so that way in time he would begin to identify, clock with the letter CLOCK. And it's like, no, that's not how reading works. It's not, I mean, there's some memorization there, but there's also a lot of cognition that goes into learning how to read. So you taking away the picture of a clock does not tell him, just because you put up the word clock, does not tell him that it's clock anymore. Now, if you want to put clock, the word clock, under the visual, the clock visual, then so be it. But you can't just take away all visuals and then say, oh, in time, he'll figure it out. That's just like putting something in Mandarin in front of us and saying, oh, well, in time, she'll figure out what those symbols means. That's not how learning works. And then you want to teach the new behavior. So, you can't just tell a child that, like the young lady who was confined to a wheelchair, she had been using the strategy of just knocking things off her tray for so long. It was like, no, now we're in middle school, we need you to use the buzzer. So you have to give the student time to use the buzzer. You need to make sure the parent, not just the parent, the teacher, the para, is aware that they need to be listening for the bell, because it could be something that they hear and they're like, yeah, I keep hearing this dinging, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I need you to be aware, teacher, that, let's just call her Mary. Mary now uses a buzzer, and you need to listen out to it, that she will ring it when she needs something. But you also need to check on Mary anyway, because that is what you would do for all of your students. And this concludes Chapter 8, Behavior Disorders.